Hi, this is Patricia Make Me Show, and I am going to be discussing Herbert Simon and the bounded rationality theory this evening for the MPA 510 History and Theory of Public Administration. So, just a brief overview about the theory. So, the theory, as you know, was developed by Herbert Simon, and basically it talks a lot about our decision making. And according to him, um, instead of us using like the optimum solution, which happens in rational methods, and I am using air quotes here, rational methods, we tend to use this bounded rationality where our decision making has a lot to do with our own perspective and how we see things. And he uses this term called satisficing, and satisficing is really, in essence, it's selecting the first good enough choice. It's not really, you know, diving in and trying to find all the information, because making a bounded rational decision has a lot to do with having lack of information, and it's making decisions that in essence he talks about we're incapable as individuals of making decisions because our decisions are generally made emotionally and cognitively, with cognitive limitations, and with time constraints. And so we're going to talk about a little about that as we move forward. So that was pretty much the summarizing of the theory. It's really about decision making. It's really about him talking about how that in order for us to understand, look at organizations, we must first look at their decision making policies. And without understanding what the policies are for making decisions in our organizations, it's hard to actually make well informed decisions without knowing that, because generally we're making them based on biases of our perspective, and a lot of times we're making them, with time constraints. And so those are some of the weaknesses that I wanted to discuss, and we'll move right into those now. So one of the weaknesses is the time constraint. Um, Simply just because a lot of times, many times, oftentimes, we're making decisions and we don't have enough time to actually weigh out all the options, to look at all the consequences. Oftentimes, decisions are come to us or even to management in a time frame where it's sort of an emergency decision that needs to be made, and so we tend to make a decision based on, sometimes even if it has to do with, an example of that would be if something's an emergency might happen at home, or where we need to go and pick up an emergency item, say for instance a band-aid or something like that, or even over-the-counter medicine. If it becomes an emergency, we don't look at what's the best price, we don't look at what might be the side effects, we just make that decision in a quick emergency, in emergency fashion. And then the other weakness is a lack of knowledge. Oftentimes, because we don't have enough information about the decision that needs to be made, we tend to make a decision not knowing all of the options, how that decision might impact the outcomes, what could happen based on that decision. And so that is another one of the weaknesses, is the lack of knowledge. And then finally, it's the cognitive limitations that we tend to use when we're making decisions, that we might have limitations or biases about a judgment about something. And so our brain kicks in and it might just be have a judgment about something, and so that sort of um, deals with or helps us to not make well-informed decisions. One of the strengths, however, when you look at knowing an organization's um, decision-making is, a good decision making policy sort of looks something like this, where you have identified a stated problem and or something that needs to have a decision. You sort of capture all of the relevant information, and then you analyze that information, and then you look at all the options and how those options might impact the decision that you're weighing out, and then the actions that come behind that, and then finally the outcomes that you might have to face based on the decision that's made. That's a healthy decision making policy, and so most organizations do well to have that. Um, and finally, as I mentioned, a good example for me regarding the bounded rationality is, I mentioned in my introduction early on, is that I work for the county, and I work in the homeless programs unit, where we deal a lot with federal grants. And so what I have noticed in my time in being there is many of the agencies, when our department puts out an RFP, a request for proposals, many of the agencies will apply, but it's clear that sometimes the decision to put in the application hasn't been a well-informed decision, because what generally happens is there's the grants usually have a spending period, which all of the grant funds need to be spent by this time period that's stated in the grant. And I can't tell you the many times that grant money is returned, because I believe it's not a well-informed decision for the agency to apply, because maybe they didn't weigh out all of the options. Maybe they didn't weigh out all of the consequences that would happen, and many times that would impede you from applying for the next year when you don't meet all of the guidelines and the restrictions that's imposed on you. So that's one example in the county, at least in my department, that, that we deal with bounded rationality, and decisions, not making well-informed decisions, not understanding the organization's decision-making policies, and in addition, just want to list my references for this presentation, and bye for now.